Killing people on a vengeance spree aside, this is actually very similar to Christian theology. Hey guys, I'm Kier, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite Marvel series to date, Moon Knight. I figured it's been out long enough now that I won't spoil it too much by talking about it. For starters, let me say that I'm a big Marvel fan, and one of my favorite things to do with any piece of superhero media is to draw themes or parallels between other works of media, other films, other characters, literary themes, and Christian theological concepts, just to name a few things. It gets very intertextual for me. As I was watching Moon Knight, I was very intrigued by this line spoken by the show's depiction of the ancient Egyptian god Khonshu. He says to the main character, Mark Spector, "You were nothing but a corpse when I found you. You think you own this body? It belongs to me." This may seem like a very harsh line, but it actually reminded me of how Christians view our relationship with Jesus the Christ, who in Christian theology is the Son of God, our Savior, and the reason Christianity is even called Christianity. Stick with me, I'll explain. There are several themes from the show that parallel or overlap with Jesus Christ. I'll start with the first one I picked up on, which is the payment of a debt. Let's return to the line Khonshu tells Mark after a big run-in with Hero and his followers. "Ungrateful Mark, you were nothing but a corpse when I found you. You think you own this body? It belongs to me." In the show, this debt is in the context of Mark's physical death. If Mark swears to do the will of Khonshu and exercises vengeance on the evildoers of the night, then Khonshu will grant Mark his physical life in exchange. And though Mark doesn't want to be a part of Khonshu's vengeance and is simply trying to get out of the debt, he comments that his servitude is the price that he pays for accepting the deal. Killing people on a vengeance spree aside, this is actually very similar to Christian theology. Now in Christianity, this concept of death in exchange for a life is largely referred to in a spiritual context. The only reason we are spiritually alive today is because of a debt paid by Jesus' willing sacrifice and physical death on a cross. We were all walking around like the living dead spiritually without regard for God, understanding of who he was, or even knowledge that he existed. That is until Jesus came and helped us to see who he was. Rather than allowing us to physically die without ever knowing God, which would have consequences for our spiritual being, think for example's sake an entirety spent in the duat after death, he decided to step into our place and take on the full consequences of having lived a life without ever knowing God. There are a lot of theological concepts that play into this, such as the concept of humans having a sin nature, or in other words, a proclivity to rebel against or step outside of God's will, what he wants, to do whatever we want instead. But focusing on just the bare bones theology, if you will, this is why it is through our faith in Jesus' physical death and resurrection that we are able to live our lives today in spiritual freedom, free from the consequences of a spiritual death. Unlike Khonshu's offer, however, this is an offer made to everyone, not just a select few who God deems worthy of doing his will. We can choose at any time to accept Jesus' sacrifice for our wrongdoings and live a life free from the consequences of a spiritual death. Unlike Mark, who is desperately trying to get out of this debt, Christians can never get out of this debt, and arguably, we don't want to. In fact, living our entire physical and spiritual lives in submission to God is our reasonable service. Romans chapter 12 verse 1 says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." In other words, Christians see living our entire lives in service and submission to God as the very least thing we can do to honor and acknowledge the enormous sacrifice that was made for us. As Mark said, our servitude is the price we pay for accepting the deal. The show alludes to Mark's debt not being repayable either, but for different reasons. Khonshu's just not gonna let him off that easy. Theme number 2 is resurrection life. After the accident that leaves Layla's father dead and Mark on the brink of death himself, Khonshu comes to him and says this: "In exchange for your life, do you swear to protect the travelers of the night and bring my vengeance to those who would do them harm? Then rise and live again as my fist of vengeance." Mark, in a sense, is resurrected from the brink of death when he accepts Khonshu's offer. He comes back from death and transforms into something new entirely: Moon Knight, a warrior, and Khonshu's avatar. Because Jesus died for us, and because our faith in his physical death and resurrection allows us to be spared from the wrath of God, we are able to live new and transformed lives. We may not turn into a superhero or anti-hero who knocks out the bad guys and kills people left and right, but we do get to live our lives differently. We get a second chance to turn our lives around and live with a new sense of divine purpose. Now notice how Mark's transformation doesn't necessarily change who he is, at least not right away. His alter Stephen isn't all of a sudden just gone, and in fact his life gets even more complicated as he goes on this journey of learning how to become whole again and saving Layla from Khonshu's hand. Throughout the series, he grows as a person and eventually finds peace within himself. This is something that is accurate to how Christians perceive our life with Christ. Accepting him doesn't mean life's trials go away, but it does mean that he protects us, he guides us, and he gives us the strength we need to overcome them, and he gives us peace on the other side of whatever trials life brings our way. Theme number 3, being the hands and feet. This is where we start to get into some major character differences between how Khonshu is depicted in the show and how Jesus Christ is depicted in the Bible. Khonshu, in true manipulative fashion at the beginning of the show, mentions to Mark that he knows that he enjoys the work that Khonshu gives him. He even comments, "We need each other." Khonshu needs an avatar or someone to do his bidding for him in the physical world. To tap into his own powers and abilities, he needs Stephen's help to turn back the night sky, and he needs Mark's help to kill all these people that he wants to return his vengeance upon. God can use a person to do his will, and from a Christian perspective, he does it all the time. Take for example Moses, who parted the Red Sea, David, who defeated Goliath, the apostles in the book of Acts who performed healing and miracles. And there's also those everyday examples such as a person serving in a church community, or that person who gives you a hug or encouraging word throughout the day, or even that person who pays for your groceries or your gas while you're standing in line. These are all examples of how God uses everyday average human beings to do his will through someone. But the difference between Jesus and Christianity and Khonshu and Moon Knight is that Jesus does not need a person or an avatar to do his will for him. He is not bound by the physical world or time. In fact, he exists outside of the physical world and outside of time itself. All he has to do is reach in at any time to make something shake. For example, Jesus, who is God himself in Christianity, came here to earth to live and die and interact with us in order that we would know the will of our Father, that we would know that our Father in heaven is near to us, and to provide an example for just living. Though he doesn't need us, God chooses to include us in his will and his plans because he knows it will strengthen our relationship with him, help us grow in our character, and bring us joy in doing so. This is why we were all given different gifts and talents as explained in Romans 12 verses 4 through 8. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts, according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And last but not least, theme number 4. Being worthy. There is a concept of worthiness in Christianity, but once again, there's a big distinction between Mark and Khonshu's dynamic and Jesus and his followers' dynamic. Early on in the show, Khonshu says to Mark that he is worth protecting. And as he's about to deal himself a fatal blow after the accident with Layla's father, he even stops and tells Mark that he's a worthy candidate of serving him during this time. He comments that his mind is fractured and broken and even speaks about all the pain that he can feel inside of him, in true manipulative fashion. In Moon Knight, what makes Mark worthy in Khonshu's eyes is the extent to which he's able to manipulate his pain, his profession as a mercenary, and his mental illness to further his plans for vengeance. Khonshu actively manipulates Mark emotionally throughout the show and dangles his loved ones in front of him with various consequences to get what he wants. His protection also proves limited considering that it comes with strings attached. It's conditionally provided as long as Mark is doing what he wants him to do. Remember earlier how I mentioned the concept of having a sin nature or a proclivity to rebel against God and what he wants to do so that we can do whatever we want to do? This is what tends to make us regular old human beings unworthy candidates of doing the will of God. Think about it. If you want a job well done, you're not necessarily going to hire someone who's had a previous history of being rebellious, doing whatever they want to do on company time, lacking respect and authority, or was just reckless in their previous place of employment. But that does not mean that we are not worthy of love, worthy of having joy, worthy of having peace, worthy of being taken care of, worthy of being protected, or worthy of being treated with kindness and respect. We are inherently worthy of these things to God as His creation and as beings created in His likeness. These things are not contingent on whether or not we do something right or wrong. They just are, because that's just who God is. He created us, and He loves us like a father to his child who He made and brought into the world. What this does mean is that what makes us worthy of doing the will of God is not inherently us. It is not because we are oh so good, but it's because the Lord is good and because He has put great potential in us. And the thing about how Jesus operates versus Khonshu is that when you're already an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent God who has everything, you don't have to manipulate, kill, steal, or destroy to get what you want. In fact, the motivation is always love, and often grace, compassion, and mercy. This is also why Christians trust God and are so intense at times when it comes to following Him. We truly believe that God as articulated in the Bible is an unequivocally holy or set apart, completely different from any other God, trustworthy, perfect, pure, good, righteous, and just God. And because we believe this, unlike Mark, who is constantly being manipulated and once out of a horrible debt, we generally don't lament over doing His will for us, because we are free to do it of our own will and because it is a joy for us to do. So there's that. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you all learned something new and found an interesting perspective about Christian theology, or just about how to interpret one of your favorite shows. If you would like to see more videos like this and about topics such as media commentary, life, faith, neurodivergence, culture, and film, remember to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you will get a notification whenever I upload a brand new video. Thank you, and until next time, see you later.